The tragic story of the Moabites, the children of Moab. Have you ever wondered how a single decision can alter the fate of future generations? Amid the ashes of Sodom and Gomorrah, a nation is born, one whose story weaves through the pages of the Bible as a testament to tragic choices and lasting consequences. The Moabites, a people born of incest, marked by idolatry, and destined to be both enemies and part of the very lineage of the Messiah. But first, give a like and subscribe to the channel. This will help spread the word of the Lord and help the channel grow. Imagine a dark night in a lonely cave, where two desperate women make a decision that will echo for thousands of years. From the depths of this morally questionable choice, Moab emerges, and with him, a nation that will challenge Israel, worship bloodthirsty idols, and yet, through Ruth, become intertwined with the very genealogy of Jesus Christ. From broken alliances to epic battles, from prophetic curses to unexpected redemption, the story of the Moabites is a biblical drama that confronts us with questions about identity, divine providence, and the paradox of grace flourishing in unlikely soil. The history of the Moabites begins after one of the most devastating events recorded in the Bible, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, Abraham's nephew, had chosen to live in Sodom, a city infamous for its wickedness and corruption. When God decided to destroy these cities due to their depravity, he sent angels to rescue Lot and his family. In Genesis 19, we read that Lot and his two daughters managed to escape, initially seeking refuge in the small town of Zoar. However, fearing for their safety, they soon left and took shelter in a cave in the mountains, an isolated place far from civilization. Having witnessed the complete destruction of the cities in the plain, Lot's daughters mistakenly believed that they and their father were the only survivors on earth. Concerned about the continuation of their lineage and with no prospects of finding husbands, they made a desperate and morally reprehensible decision. On 2 consecutive nights, Lot's daughters intoxicated their father with wine, taking advantage of his unconscious state to lie with him. As a result of these incestuous unions, both conceived sons. The elder daughter bore a son and named him Moab, a name that literally means from the father, leaving no ambiguity about the child's origins. This Moab became the patriarch and founder of the Moabite nation. Over time, Moab's descendants multiplied and settled in the region east of the Dead Sea. This area, later known as the land of Moab, was strategically located and rich in natural resources, which allowed the Moabite nation to develop. The first Moabite settlements appeared in fertile valleys and plains where they cultivated crops and raised livestock. Gradually, they formed more stable communities, built villages that grew into cities, and established a distinct cultural identity separate from their neighboring peoples. The land of Moab was geographically diverse and strategically positioned. Located east of the Dead Sea, it featured vast fertile plains that gradually rose into the mountains of the Transjordan Plateau. This varied terrain provided ideal conditions for different types of economic activities. In the plains, the Moabites developed a thriving agricultural economy, cultivating wheat, barley, olives, and vineyards. The highlands, in turn, offered excellent pastures for their flocks of sheep and goats. The abundance of water was ensured by numerous rivers and streams, with the Arnon River being the most significant, serving as a natural border in many periods of history. Moab's geographical position was highly advantageous, situated between the Arabian Desert to the east and the fertile lands of Canaan to the west. Moab stood at the crossroads of major trade routes connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia and Arabia. This strategic location greatly contributed to the kingdom's wealth through trade and reinforced its political significance in the region. The major Moabite cities were well fortified with imposing walls that leveraged natural geographical features to enhance their defense capabilities. Among the most important cities were Dibon, Nebo, Medeba, and Ar, the capital. One of the most notable geographical landmarks in Moab was Mount Nebo. According to Deuteronomy 34, it was from this mountain that Moses beheld the promised land before he died, unable to enter it. This event gave Mount Nebo a special historical and religious significance, making it an important landmark not only for the Moabites, but also within Israelite biblical tradition. Moab's borders shifted throughout its history, but generally, the kingdom was bordered by Ammon to the north, Edom to the south, and Israel to the west, separated by the Dead Sea. These geographical proximities profoundly influenced Moabite political and religious history, leading to periods of conflict, alliances, and mutual cultural influences. Moabite culture was predominantly agricultural and pastoral. The Moabites were known for their expertise in livestock breeding, particularly sheep and cattle, as well as in wool production and agricultural cultivation. Their proximity to trade routes also allowed them to exchange these goods with merchants from distant lands, obtaining exotic items and developing a relatively prosperous society by the standards of their time. The first significant encounter between the Moabites and the Israelites occurred during the Exodus. After escaping Egypt, the people of Israel wandered the desert for 40 years before entering the Promised Land. At the end of this journey, they arrived at the plains of Moab, near the Jordan River opposite Jericho, as reported in Numbers 21 and 22. When the Israelites approached Moabite territory, they sent messengers to the king of Moab, requesting permission to pass through his land. They promised to stay on the main road without straying into fields or vineyards, and even offered to pay for any water they used during their journey. However, the king of Moab categorically refused their request, forcing the Israelites to bypass his territory. This refusal was not merely an act of hostility, but rather a reflection of deep-seated fear. According to Numbers 22:3, Moab was greatly afraid of the people because they were numerous. News of Israel's victories over the Amorites and other peoples had already reached the Moabites, causing genuine panic at the sight of this approaching multitude. Faced with this perceived threat, Balak, the king of Moab, resorted to an unusual tactic. Instead of relying solely on his army, he sent messengers to Balaam, a renowned seer or prophet from Mesopotamia, hiring him to curse the Israelites. At that time, it was believed that blessings or curses pronounced by men like Balaam had real power to influence the fate of nations and peoples. The story of Balaam, detailed in Numbers 22-24, is one of the most intriguing in the Bible. On his journey to meet Balak, Balaam is rebuked by his own donkey, which miraculously speaks after seeing an angel of the Lord blocking the path. This episode foreshadows what is to come. Balaam will only be able to speak the words that God allows him to. Upon arriving in Moab, Balaam is taken by Balak to various high places from where he could see the Israelite camp. At each location, Balak builds altars and offers sacrifices, hoping that Balaam will finally curse Israel. But to Balak's growing frustration, instead of curses, Balaam delivers 4 successive oracles, each more favorable to Israel than the last. In his final prophecy, Balaam even foretells the rise of a powerful king in Israel. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Numbers 24:17. Words that would later be interpreted as a messianic reference. The consequences of this prophecy were significant for both nations. For Israel, it was a divine confirmation of their protection and special destiny. For Moab, it was a severe blow to their defensive strategy, leading Balak to resort to more insidious tactics. According to Numbers 25-31, the Moabites, following Balaam's own advice, sent their women to seduce Israelite men, leading them into sexual immorality and idolatry. This scheme was temporarily successful. Many Israelites succumbed to temptation, participating in feasts honoring Baal of Peor, a local deity. God's wrath was kindled against Israel, resulting in a plague that killed 24,000 people until it was stopped by Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron. This episode at Peor deeply impacted relations between the two peoples, creating lasting hostility and setting a precedent for future mistrust. The initial interactions between Moabites and Israelites, marked by hostility and seduction into idolatry, had long-term consequences that were reflected in Israel's religious laws. In the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, we find several specific prohibitions related to the Moabites. Although Leviticus does not explicitly mention the Moabites in its laws of ethnic separation, it establishes general principles of separation between the Israelites and peoples who practiced idolatry. These laws were later specifically applied to the Moabites in Deuteronomy 23 verses 3-6, which states, "No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever." This severe prohibition was justified by two main reasons. First, because the Moabites did not offer the Israelites bread and water when they came out of Egypt, and second, because they hired Balaam to curse Israel. The text further states, "You shall not seek their peace or their prosperity all your days forever." The prohibitions included restrictions on intermarriage with Moabites, aiming to prevent foreign religious influence. In ancient times, marriage alliances often involved religious alliances as well, requiring the acceptance of the gods of the spouse's family. To maintain the purity of worship to Yahweh, such unions were discouraged or explicitly forbidden. The theological reasons for these prohibitions were profound. The people of Israel were called to be holy, set apart for God, and to remain distant from the idolatry prevalent among neighboring nations. The Moabites, with their worship of Chemosh and other gods, posed a constant threat to Israel's religious fidelity. It is interesting to note that the treatment of the Moabites in Israelite law was particularly severe compared to other nations. For instance, descendants of Esau and Egyptians could be accepted into the assembly of the Lord after 3 generations, whereas the prohibition for Moabites was declared to last forever. In the context of ritual purity, crucial in Israel's religious system, ethnic separation was not primarily a matter of race, but of religion and morality. The goal was not ethnic discrimination, but rather the preservation of Israel's religious integrity as a covenant people. The issue of banning Moabites from entering the assembly of the Lord has been interpreted in different ways by scholars. Some understand it as total exclusion from the religious community, while others see it as merely prohibiting Moabites from holding official positions or participating in certain religious ceremonies. Either way, this prohibition underscored the seriousness with which Moabite influence was perceived as a threat. Central to the cultural and religious identity of the Moabites was the worship of Chemosh, their national god. In inscriptions and historical references, Chemosh is frequently mentioned as the god of Moab, much like Yahweh was for Israel. Chemosh was a warrior deity, often associated with destruction and conquest. According to the Mesha stele, also known as the Moabite stone, an important 9th century BC archaeological artifact, King Mesha of Moab attributed his military victories to Chemosh. In this inscription, Mesha recounts how Chemosh was angry with his people, allowing them to be subdued by Israel, but later instructed him to reclaim the lost territory. The religious practices associated with the worship of Chemosh were particularly disturbing by Israelite moral standards. Historical evidence and biblical references suggest that the Moabites, like other Canaanite peoples, practiced human sacrifices on extreme occasions. In 2 Kings 3 verse 27, there is a striking account of how the king of Moab, when besieged by the forces of Israel, Judah, and Edom, took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him as a burnt offering on the city wall. The contrast between the worship of Chemosh and the adoration of Yahweh was profound. While Israelite religion, despite including animal sacrifices, categorically forbade human sacrifice and emphasized justice, mercy, and moral holiness, Moabite worship, as described in biblical sources, seems centered on notions of power, domination, and the appeasement of a cruel deity. The negative influence of Chemosh worship on the Israelites is evident in several biblical episodes. In 1 Kings 11 verse 7, we read that King Solomon, influenced by his foreign wives, built an altar for Chemosh on the hill east of Jerusalem, a clear violation of the first commandment. This religious syncretism was harshly condemned by the prophets and is presented as one of the causes of divine judgment upon Israel. The relationship between Moabite idolatry and its consequences for their people is a recurring theme in biblical narratives. The prophets often interpreted Moab's military defeats and calamities as a result of their worship of false gods who were incapable of protecting their worshippers. Archaeological artifacts discovered in the region of Moab provide tangible evidence of Chemosh worship. In addition to the aforementioned Mesha stele, archaeologists have uncovered figurines, altars, and other ritual objects associated with the veneration of this deity. These findings help contextualize and confirm aspects of the biblical narrative. The Moabite stone, discovered in 1868 in Dibon, ancient Devon, is one of the most important historical records related to the Moabites. This black basalt stele, approximately 1.15 meters tall, contains an inscription by King Mesha of Moab, celebrating his successful rebellion against Israel. The text, composed in a dialect very close to Hebrew, provides a Moabite perspective on events also recorded in the Bible, particularly in 2 Kings 3, offering a fascinating counterpoint to the biblical narrative. The relations between Moabites and Israelites were marked by tensions and conflict from their earliest encounters. After Israel's settlement in Canaan, territorial disputes inevitably arose due to geographical proximity and conflicting interests in the region. During the period of the Judges, a time characterized by cycles of apostasy, oppression, repentance, and deliverance in Israel, one of the most significant confrontations between the two peoples took place. According to Judges 3 verses 12 to 30, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, king of the Moabites, against Israel because they had done evil in his sight. Eglon, described as a very fat man, formed an alliance with the Ammonites and Amalekites. Together, they defeated Israel and took possession of the city of Palms, likely Jericho. For 18 years, the Israelites were under Moab's oppressive rule, paying heavy tribute to Eglon. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord, he raised up Ehud, son of Gera, a left-handed Benjamite, to deliver them. The account of how Ehud assassinated Eglon is told in vivid detail. Ehud crafted a double-edged dagger, hid it under his garments on his right side, where guards were less likely to search, and requested a private audience with the king, claiming to have a secret message. When they were alone in the king's private chamber, Ehud declared, "I have a message from God for you." As Eglon rose from his seat, Ehud drew the dagger with his left hand and plunged it into the king's belly with such force that even the handle went in after the blade, and the fat closed over it. Taking advantage of the ensuing confusion, Ehud escaped, gathered the Israelites, and led an attack against the Moabites. The Bible reports that they struck down about 10,000 Moabites that day, all strong and valiant men. Not one escaped. As a result, Moab was subdued under the hand of Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. This episode established the Arnon River as the boundary between the two territories, a demarcation that would remain significant throughout subsequent history. More importantly, it exemplifies the cycles of domination and deliverance that characterized Israel's relations with its neighbors.